Hey guys, I'm Ryan Hayworth. I am at the University of Idaho in Idaho Falls, and before I start in this lecture or this lesson, I wanted to share something that I'm really thankful. I really appreciate the fact that not only am I teaching this course, which is really cool because yesterday was the release date for the updated version of the Creative Cloud. So Illustrator has some new things, and we'll get into those in the course. But then also the best part is the live class setting that I have. We had class yesterday, and I learned some things about how to present and how to teach that I hadn't thought of before. And it's really an enjoyable experience. So this lesson is going to be reflective of some of those things. Also, the whole course is going to be fluid and dynamic, just like that. So as we progress through the course, you will be able to, I'm going to come back in this kind of setting and be able to focus on some things that we've discussed, focus on some things that may have been an issue with, and then I also will just continue to prepare things ahead of time for the next class coming up. So that's my goal with this, and so let's jump right in here. Going to go ahead and open my new version. I updated this morning. This is the Adobe Creative Cloud version, the 2015 release, released yesterday. There are some slight differences from the old version released last year, and I will show, maybe I can show some of those as we go through, and so I'll open that version as well. So the first thing you'll notice on a Mac, and I'm not sure what it looks like on a PC, is that the new version, and it's helpful for me to keep it straight, the 2015 has the Illustrator CC in the application title up here in the top menu bar, whereas the 2014 version only has Illustrator, which is just fine. That'll help us keep it straight. The CC version has the bridge, and it also has a link to Adobe stock photos. And then the document arrangement tab, which we didn't discuss yesterday, we'll talk about in a later session. But then it also has in the 2015 a GPU performance link, and that is this little rocket ship looking thing, and you click on that and it opens your preferences pane, and at the same time it goes right to the GPU performance. What that does is it'll enhance some of the things that you might use in the application, for example zooming or panning and scrolling with the hand tool. And I can show you how the difference is. It's really not as important for a basic beginner class like this, but just know that there is that enhancement. I have mine checked because I have a compatible GPU, and it says so right there. It's detected. If you want to know more information, there's a further or more information link right there. I'm just going to hit cancel, and I'll show you the difference on the older version. So Command K, Control K on a PC will get you the preferences pane, and you can see there is no GPU performance tab in there. Just side by side. This is the 2014 version. There's no GPU performance section. There is a GPU performance section on the 2015, and there are some other slight differences as well, and we'll talk about those as we get into the tools a little more. So this is lesson module 1.3, and we're going to discuss Adobe Illustrator basics such as the files. We'll talk about opening files and creating new files. Also, within creating new files, we will talk about everything in the new files document pane that opens, and that is it has document profiles, some other settings, the color mode, specific document profile choices, artboards, and then we'll discuss rulers and units and guides and grids. So here we go. Very first, in order to create a new file, you will go to either the file menu and choose new, or you can choose from a template, and we won't discuss that in this one. However, later in the course we will talk about creating templates and using templates, so that's something that we'll discuss then. So either choose Command N on a Mac or Control N on a PC, and you will bring up the new document window pane here. Within that you have some options. First is what you would like to name this document. Next you've got, and obviously whatever you'd like to name is what you'd want to name it. Next we have the profile, the document profile settings, and you can see by default it starts with the last setting that you used, and in my case that's print. And so you can see there are some choices here: print, web, devices, video and film, and basic RGB. That is a change from the CS6 version. It also allowed Flash Builder, but Flash Builder's kind of going away, and there are still some options for that. You can just build a custom document. We're not going to discuss that. Just know that there are other options than these profile settings. Before we make a choice, we're going to go twirl open this little triangle here on the Advanced tab, and you can see some of the other advanced features. Now this is a basic class, but these are very important things to know about new documents that will impact how you are able to work with documents depending on the color mode. And the color mode is Adobe's version of what's commonly referred to as color space, and it's basically the format or color that is going to be used on your document. So getting right into those color modes, the first is CMYK, and that is the default for whenever we are printing something out. And then the other option is RGB, and so you see we can change those, and it changes our settings. It looks like we're using a custom profile because I've gone back and forth a little bit. So what is CMYK? Well, CMYK is how things are printed at your home printer, or in most what's called CMYK process printers. And basically that means there's a combination of cyan, which is a light blue, magenta, we know what magenta is, yellow, obviously yellow, and black. So those are the colors. And so in your image you choose a color, and that is printed as a process or combination of those four different colors from the inkjet or the printer's cartridge, or whatever you happen to use. If it's a laser, it still uses those same four colors, but just in a different fashion. So I'll show you specifically the differences between CMYK color and RGB color once we get into a document here, but just know where these color mode settings are so that you can adjust them. We also talked about raster graphics, and you have an option here for how to define how those are displayed. Obviously, remember 300 ppi, pixels per inch, is a lot higher and better quality than 72 or even 150 ppi. So know where that option is. And then also, as we get into it, we'll discuss some of those things as well later on as we're preparing for a print output. Right now, we're going to go through the color profile choices, or the document profile choices. And so I'm in print, and within print, the first thing I can do is change the number of artboards, and think of that as pages that you're going to print on. We'll show you how that works here in a little bit in this lesson, this module we're doing right now. The next thing we can change is the letter size, or excuse me, the size of the document, the artboard, and we can have it be letter, legal, and tabloid, which are the standard US paper sizes, or we can do A4, A3, B5, and B4. So if you're anywhere outside of North America, those will be the ones that you'll probably use. However, we can also customize. So if I want it smaller or larger than a piece of paper, I can change that as well, in the width and the height. The other thing we can use is the units, and we'll discuss units in depth here in just a second. And I want to focus on that a little bit later. Also, the orientation. So you've got two options. You've got portrait, and think of how you view a portrait. It's usually, you know, head and shoulders taller rather than wide. And then the other option is landscape, and think of it that way. As you take a picture of the landscape, you want as much of the horizon as possible, and so it's wider than it is tall. And those are the different settings for your document, for your artboards. So I'm going to go back to the default letter. I'm going to go landscape just because it fits my screen a little better, and I'm going to hit OK. Before I do that, there's the bleed, which has reference to when a printer prints ink on a page, there's an allowance of how much ink can go near the edges of the paper, and that's called the bleed. And you think of the ink, it's going to run and it's going to bleed all over the edge of the paper. That's how you remember that, and so you can have those settings, so many inches or pixels or picas or points or whatever within the edge of the media, the paper that's being used. I'm not going to worry about that right now. So again, I'm going to go print, letter size, landscape, and click OK. So here's my blank document. We'll start in CMYK color mode, and the reason is because most of what we're going to do in this course, and most of what you're going to do as an industrial designer, is preparing things, designing things for print. You may have the chance later or in other situations where you're doing something for video or web or another situation, and you may need to use the RGB color space. We will discuss that. But just know the difference between CMYK and RGB, and that's what we're going to do. So first, let me just grab the rectangle tool, which is M on your keyboard, and I will drag a square, and then I'm going to make it change color. So first thing we'll do is we'll go up to the color panel. Where's my color panel, and why isn't it working? Flip and flip. So I've created this rectangle. I'm going to go up to my color palette, or my color panel, depending on which version you're used to. I think it is still called the color palette because it looks like a palette like you would have as an artist. So I will click that, and by default all the new settings have it minimized so you can only see just the color picker. You'll click the little up and down arrows to kind of maximize the window. So anyway, CMYK color. As you can tell, I have white as my fill color, and that's active, and all of these sliders are at 0%. And what that means is the printer is going to print out whatever ink in from essentially from those 4 trays. We've got a cyan, a magenta, a yellow, and a black tray. Now in your cartridge at home you may have all 3 colors in one, and it just gets mixed by the computer, by the printer, and this is the same process, and that's why they call it CMYK process color. So for example, if I want a different color, I will just add a little bit or a lot of any of these 4 colors to get that hue, that shade, and I'll show you what I mean. So I can grab a color here in this strip of kind of a rainbow looking thing. I can make it bigger if I need to have more, you know, precision in my color choice. I'll make it pretty big. We'll do that. So if I pick a nice orange right in here, you see that it changed the color of my fill, and so the color of my shape, but then also it tells me how much of each color is used in this color. So for cyan, it's using 0. It's not using any cyan to make that orange. To make the to use the magenta, it's using what, 60.39%. It's using completely 100% of the yellow. So imagine your little cartridge sitting in your printer, and in order to print this yellow, which is a bright yellow, or excuse me, to print this orange, it's going to basically take from, imagine little bottles of ink color, and sometimes you may have separate ink colors, the cyan, the magenta, the yellow, and the black. And what happens, your printer is going to use 60% of the magenta, 100% yellow, no black, and no cyan. And that will give you this color right here that you see on my screen. So does that make sense for CMYK color? I hope so. You've got variation of the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. K for black, obviously, because you can't use B, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. So you can pick different colors, and you can watch the slider. All of these sliders go up and down in value, which again is the percentage of that base color, cyan, magenta, yellow, or black, that's going into and being mixed together to get the color that you see on the screen, and will print out in that color. Okay, so that is the CMYK color mode. For RGB, we can either go all the way back and create a new document, but I can just show you right here. You see that I have the CMYK sliders. I'm going to go up to this little option box and choose RGB. And the reason I would do that is because now I can see RGB as an option of my colors. So what does RGB stand for? Well, R is red, G is green, and B is blue. Hence the reason we can't use B in the CMYK. We have to use the K, because otherwise people would think that it's cyan, magenta, yellow, and blue. So K just makes it easier to figure out in the CMYK, and B is the color blue in RGB. Now remember, in our discussion of screen resolution and print resolution uses ink that's printed on a white page, and we just discussed that. That's the CMYK colors. And screen resolution turns on pixels of light within your monitor. Now how that works is you have a value that that pixel will illuminate at. So for example, if we drag all of our sliders down to 0, it's going to illuminate nothing. It's going to be completely turned off. It's black for those areas of the monitor. And if we drag it all the way up to 255, all three of them, then we are going to get white. Now all of the pixels together, it's red light and green light and blue light all together, and so that ends up with what appears to be white light. You may be able to see some color variation depending on your monitor, if you have, you know, some of the pixels going out or something like that, but just know that the RGB values are the screen colors. And so then anytime you're using output to screen, like an Android device, or you know, your tablet, or a video, or to film, you're going to be using RGB color rather than CMYK. And again, in our case, we're going to focus mostly on CMYK, so that just know the difference, and that's where you can find and make those changes. Now watch again, I can choose a similar orange like we had with the CMYK, and it'll tell me that the value of that orange is 255 red, or excuse me, 252, so almost completely white on all of the red pixels, if that makes sense, almost all completely on. And green is 133, so about halfway between off and on. And blue, there's no blue in it, it's 0. So all of the blue pixels are turned off for that area. Does that make sense? I hope so. So now you know a little bit about the color modes. Let's go back and we will open the new dialog box again by hitting Command N on a Mac, Control N on a PC. And we will take a look a little bit more at some of the other document profile settings. So we've got print, we discussed those, the paper sizes. If you go to web, you will see these pixel dimensions, so standard web website sizes, and you can use any of those if you're designing for web. We have devices, and under devices we've got all of the you know, most popular tablets and phones and things like that. Just know where they are if you're asked to do a device layout, excuse me, an application layout for a specific device, say a Galaxy S5 phone or something like that. Then there's also the video and film, and that has the NTSC, which is the US, and the PAL, which is the European, and then you've got HD video and some other options there, and then all the way up to film in 2K or 4K, and that just changes, you know, based on it will change the width and the height based on what you need and the aspect orientation. And then basic RGB, which has all of the print sizes, but it will keep the color mode in RGB, and it will have the screen, the raster effect, as though it were low res, which is 72 ppi. And we talked about low resolution, we talked about color mode already, so know that where these things are if you are asked to do a document in one of those options. That's where it is. The very next thing we'll talk about is, let's go back to print. Actually, we can cancel out of here because we have a document open already, and we will talk about artboards. So what are artboards and what is an artboard? Essentially, the artboard is this white area here in a print document. Imagine it's the piece of paper on which you are doing your design. So I will zoom out using Command minus, Control minus on a PC, and you can see there's this white area. That is my artboard. And then I have my artwork, which is on the artboard, and it is the the colored area that I'm working and creating. So if I zoom all the way out, go as far as I can, then you can see that this workspace is like a big table, and small on this big work table is the artboard, and so that tells me I can go pretty big with my artboards. I don't know that I've ever seen a piece of an artboard that filled up greater than the workspace here. So just know that what the difference between an artboard and the workspace is. And again, the artboard is the essentially piece of paper that we're doing our artwork on. Now you can have more than one artboard, and in order to do that, just think of when you grab another sheet of paper and you have two things that you're working with. They're on your table. So I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to Command minus again to zoom out, Control minus on a PC. I do it a couple of times, and then I'm going to hold down the space bar to get the hand tool. The hand tool is way over here on the toolbar, and you can access it using the H key, but I prefer doing what's called the finger dance, and again we'll talk about that later. And the space bar is the modifier for using the hand tool. And why I would want to do that is I'm going to click while holding down the space, and I can drag that over to the side, and so then on my workspace I have this big area that's not got an artboard in it. So there are three ways to get to an artboard. There's actually more than three, and I'll show you all of them. First, we can go up here to Document Setup, and I click that, and then there's the Edit Artboards, and we are in the Edit Artboard tool. We're in the Artboard tool actually, and I can create or copy or change, modify my artboard. I'm going to escape out of this to show you another way to get to it. In the File menu, down to Document Setup, and then there's that same Edit Artboards button. That's number 2. I'm going to escape out of that again. Let's go take a look and see what the shortcut is for that. The shortcut for Document Setup is Command Shift P or Control Shift P, excuse me, Control Alt P or Command Alt P, right there. Right there. So I will do that, and it brings up the document setup. I can click Artboards, but there's even a better option. I can come over here to the Artboard tool, and the Artboard tool is this one that looks like a square with some lines coming out of each corner, and I can either click that and that'll bring up my Artboard tool, or I can simply know the shortcut keys, and you've heard me preach about the shortcuts, so Shift O. Shift O will bring up your Artboard tool, and now we're using the Artboard tool. There's some things we can do with it. So one thing I'm reminding myself to let you know about with the Artboard tool, well, with any of the shortcut keys, and that is, be sure you are not in a text box or typing with text of any sort, and I'll show you that when we get to the text tool. But just know that if you try and use shortcut keys while you're within the text tool, they won't work because you are editing text, and that uses the keyboards, so your keyboard shortcuts will not work. So just know that ahead of time. Get out of your active text if you're doing any text editing, and then you can use your shortcut key. So again, for the Artboard, it's Shift O, and think of board has a long O in the sound, so Shift O, maybe that's one way you can remember it. I'm going to do a another separate video on all of the shortcut keys for each of the tools and how to remember them. So here's what we're going to do with the artboard. As you see up here, we have some presets with our artboard tool. We can change the size to any of these presets, and those are also the document profile sizes that we saw when we were looking at new documents earlier. So again, letter, legal, tabloid for US and Canada, the different paper sizes of the rest of the world. You've got the film and video, you've got devices, and you've got some you've got some web standard sizes. So you can change your size of your document or your artboard based on a preset. You can also change the orientation. Again, portrait, just like a portrait that you would see, it's vertical more than horizontal. It's skinnier and taller than it is wide. And then landscape, and as you remember, when I created this document, I set the artboard as landscape. You can create a new artboard, and we'll do that right now. So if I click this new artboard, which kind of looks like a little page, and that's how you can think of it. I've got this new artboard. I can click or I can move it around with my mouse, and it is going to stay with the cursor until I click somewhere, and then it becomes a new artboard. Now there are some other things I can do with that. When you have an artboard selected, once you create a new one, it will turn off the new document or the new artboard as the active option, and then you have this move tool. You can see it kind of looks like crossing arrows, and so think of that as I can move it this direction, any way, just like the arrows are going all over the place. So I can move it around and put it where I'd like it. I can also change that artboard's orientation from portrait, landscape, and back, and that's just based on clicking those. I can delete an artboard. Say I don't like where this ended up, or I want a different size. I can just hit that and get delete. I'm going to undo. Undo command is just like most other applications, and that would be your Control Z on a PC, Command Z on a Mac. And there's my unwanted artboard again. I can rename that artboard, so I will rename this one Portrait because it's a portrait artboard, and that's just because that's what I want to name it. There are some other things that we can do. We can move and copy the artwork with the artboard, and I'll show you what that means. Let's go back to this one here and select it, and all you do is just click on it. Now when I drag this first artboard around, you can see my orange square goes with it, and that is because this move copy artboard or artwork with artboard is selected. I can unselect that, and then now I've done it. What is the shortcut again? I can't hear you. So Shift O. Yes, Shift O. I'm going to select the artboard, this first one that has the square in it, and now that I have the copy and move unselected, I can move it around, and I can move it away from my artwork if I want to, and so I have that option. There is a couple of other things that we can do. This is the show center mark, and as you see, it's active right now. Let's toggle through that. Oops, first. And I can, so when I have the center mark, I don't know if you can see that on this screen or not. Let me move it away from my artwork. The center mark is right there. It's this green crosshair at the middle. And I have that on because that is the center mark option here. I click it again, it goes away. I also have crosshairs, which means the points out here and then I can show or hide the video safe areas. Don't worry about that too much unless you are doing any video editing, because on a screen essentially you have things that show up on the screen and then some things that you want to be safe and keep them from going off the sides. Just don't worry about that in this case. We're not using video in this course, so that's where we're going to leave it. So we can click this button here for Artboard Options, which brings up this Artboard Options pane. I can rename it within there. I could have named it there. I can change the presets, change the width, the size, the reference point. We'll talk about reference point here in a minute. I can constrain the proportions. I can show all of those things that we just talked about there, the center mark, the crosshairs, and the video safe areas. I can also do some other things with this artboard, or I can delete the artboard. And I'm going to cancel out of that because I want to leave it there for now. The next point I want to bring up is the reference point. So the reference point talks about where in the artboard, and it also affects when we're talking about objects later. So as we talk about the vector objects later, this should come back into your memory and say, oh yeah, that's what we talked about with artboards. So with artboards, let me go to this artboard here because it doesn't have any artwork on it. I can move it around and you can see the X position and the Y position, where it is, where it lives on my workspace. Now you can also see the width and height, and you can constrain the width and height. For example, if you would like to resize it, and resizing is just grabbing one of the corners or the edge, and you can do it like that to get a different size. You can also put in an actual physical dimension and it will, you know, resize to that. Again, I have it constrained, so it went back to the size that I wanted it at. So again, reference points. As you look on the artboard or any vector object, when you have it selected, you're going to see some points, and they're represented by these little boxes here. So I've got a box in the upper left corner, a box in the top middle, a box in the upper right side, you know, the left side center, the complete center, the right side middle, the lower left, the bottom middle, and the bottom right. And those are related to the points here on the reference point little indicator. So if I want to resize or move this artboard to a fixed specific place, I can check where I want the corner to be or the side. So I want this top corner to be at 0 and 0. And you see now that it moved all the way over here to 0, 0. I can change my reference point to be the opposite corner and again do 0 and 0, and it'll move to that area, that referenced point, then moves to that fixed point in the workspace. Does that make sense? I hope so. Also, for example, if I would like to reorient my page and I want to orient it around this top left corner and I want it to go landscape from that point, I select on the reference point the upper left corner, I go to landscape, and now this side stayed, or this point stayed the same, and it just reoriented from vertical to horizontal in that orientation. Does that make sense? I hope so. If you have any questions, either leave them in the comment below, or if you are in my course, the live course right now, just send me an email or talk to me and ask me those questions. So that's Artboards. Again, you can have as many artboards as you would like, but I'm going to delete this one again and get back to my original. Put this at 0 and 0, and in order to exit out of the artboard, there's a couple of options. One, you can select any tool. So for example, I can select the eraser tool. I can select the selection tool, which is what I usually do, but then I found something out yesterday. It was quite interesting. If I hit escape, I default to that selection tool. So if I have no tool selected, I default to the selection tool. So that helps me solve that problem. So there you go. That is about artboards. Next we will discuss units and rulers, guides, and grids. Okay, so when you want to know measurement, and that's pretty much all the time in Adobe Illustrator, you're going to be talking about the units of measure. You're going to use the rulers, and you're going to probably need guides and grids to align things. So when we want to know about the rulers, the units, there are two ways to get into that. We can go into our preferences pane, which again is Command K or Control K, and that will get us right there. And then we can go down to units on that pane, or I'm going to escape out of this, go down to the file menu, find your preferences, and on a Mac that's under the Illustrator CC menu, and then to preferences. And as you look at units, you see that it has a shortcut key, which is awesome. I love shortcut keys, and make sure that you love them too. So if you're on a PC, in order to get to the preferences menu like this, you would go under edit, and it's down there a ways, and one of the options is units. So our shortcut key is command comma, and so control comma on a PC. Let's do that. There is my preferences pane and pre-selected units. So that is pretty awesome. I like that. Another way to get to it, of course, if you have nothing selected, you can click the preferences button up here in the top center of the screen and select units. So with units, there are a few things that you can change on your settings. One is the general units of measure. So the general units of measure you can use in Illustrator are points, and points are a typographical term, and you may be familiar with points if you ever used a Word document or any other text editing tool where you had to adjust the the font size, and fonts are defined in sizes of points. So 12 points, 15 points, 72 points, and it has to do with that size. Now the next step you can use is another typographical term, and that would be picas. And so a pica has to do with relationship to a point. In fact, it's either 12 or 6 points to a pica, and that's another type of typography measurement. So just know what that is and where you need it if you need to define something in picas. So you can also choose inches for US and Canada, millimeters and centimeters for anybody who uses metric, or pixels. Now again, pixels are important if you are designing for a screen of any type, video, web, or a device. of that sort. So those are the general units of measure. You can also define the stroke, which is the line around the outside of any object, and you can set that as points, picas, inches, millimeters, etc. You can also do the same for your typography, and that will only give you the 4 options of points and inches and millimeters and pixels. Only the reason there's no picas in there is because that would be humongous font sizes, and the fonts typically don't re-render at that size. So now we know about units of measure. I'm going to bring back my general unit of measure to inches, and I'm going to click OK. Now that I have some sort of measurement, I need to be able to use those measurements. And what do we use generally to measure something? We use a ruler. And so let me bring the ruler tool, and the rulers can be shown by hitting Control R or Command R on a Mac, or coming down from the View menu down to Rulers, and you can either show rulers or hide rulers if they are on. And I'm going to do show rulers, and again that's just a toggle. I can go Command R, Control R to turn them off, on, off. It's just one of those easy to remember things. I'm going to go Command 0 to go full screen, or not full screen, but bring my artboard to fill the whole viewable window here, just so I can see some things with it. Now, one thing you need to make sure that you can see before we do anything else is, if you are following along, be sure that you can see both the left hand ruler and the right hand, or the top ruler. So I know that I can see mine, and then I'm able to show you what's going on. If you need to do any sort of modifications to that, say you are in a Mac and it looks something like that, well, you are in one of these full screen modes. You can see your ruler down here in the corner. So what you will need to do is press F on the keyboard to enable the next toggle through the full screen modes. There are 3 of them. Or use the button down here, which is change screen mode. And so again, that is the F key. So F will bring me to full screen without any menus, and F again will bring me back to a window where I can move. And again, this is only on the Mac. You should only have this problem if you can't see the rulers on a Mac. And then I can click the plus button here to maximize my window, and there I have it set where I need to, except for whatever reason in CC 2015 it likes to throw my panel, my minimized panel or collapsed panel, all the way over to where you saw it right there. I don't know why. It's a bug I've noticed, but there you have it. I have my screen back to where I need it and where I want it. So we'll focus on the rulers now. So the rulers, in order to change the rulers, say you decide that instead of you working in inches like I am, you would rather work in millimeters or pixels. You're doing something with web, and so then you'll need pixels. Whatever your reasoning is, I'm not going to be a judge. But if you need to change your rulers from this point, you may right click or control click. Hopefully you've got right click option on your computer, and control click would be the Mac version. And you right click on this and you can change your ruler from points to picas to inches, millimeters, those same options that we had in the preferences pane. So I'm going to click out of that. Now the other thing that you saw, let me go back into there, right click again on the ruler, was this change to global rulers. What in the world does that have to do with? Well, I'll show you that. I'm going to Command minus or Control minus on a PC a couple of times. I'm going to get my hand tool, so use this space bar and drag to move my artboard. I'm going to go Shift O to get a new artboard, or to bring up my artboard tool, and I will get the new artboard button, and I will place another artboard. In fact, I will place two artboards, so we have three altogether, and it doesn't matter where they are. I just wanted to put them in line right there. I'm going to hit Escape to go back to editing outside of the artboards, and now you see I have my three artboards here, and interestingly enough, look what happened to my ruler. Let me zoom in, and this is another one of the finger dance keys. I'm going to hold down Command or Control on a PC and then hold down space, and when I do that on a Mac, you see the spotlight search. Now I'm not going to use the spotlight search. That's just one of the features on a Mac, and I haven't disabled it because it's kind of handy sometimes when I'm in another program. But you can also see in my cursor has turned into the zoom tool, and that is actually zooming in tool. So I'm going to zoom in on this corner here, and if you don't have CC 2015, it's going to look a little different than what I do. I'm going to click and pull my viewing in on 2014, and earlier versions of Illustrator you would make a selection. It would make a rectangle around that box. I can pause and show you that here in a second. Okay, so now I'm in Adobe Illustrator CC version 2014, so last year's version, and you saw what I did with the zoom tool, with my finger dance, using the Command and space bar, and again in that older version, and this has been all the way back since they started with spotlight search. However, the zoom tool all the way back through version 7 back in 1997 when I started using Illustrator would have this aspect of the finger dance. So again, Command or Control and then hold down the space bar, and you're holding down Command or Control. So again, Control or Command, you hold that down, and then with your next finger over you hold down the space bar, and then you will, in 2014 and CS6 and CS5 and anything prior, you would make a rectangle, and you can see this rectangle that I've created, and as soon as I let go of my cursor or my mouse button, it will zoom in. Again, on the 2015 version, I'm going to zoom out, still doing the same function. It just does that fluid zoom animation, and that is part of the new GPU preferences that I mentioned really early on. So that's what we're doing here. That's why there's a difference. If you see it differently on your screen, now you know why. Go ahead and update to 2015 if you can, and that's where we're at. So other than that, we'll continue outside of 2014. I will go ahead and close that back up. So that is a little bit about the zoom function, the new zoom function, and GPU enhancements from the 2015 revision of Adobe Illustrator CC. Now the reason we're even zoomed in here is because I wanted to show you the global rulers. So let's zoom back out again, and you see that we have these three artboards still. We have 0 at this point right here, and it's referenced off of this last artboard. I need to have it move this ruler to somewhere else in the artboard. So how do you move a ruler? Well, you come all the way up here to the upper left corner where it looks like a little crosshair thing, and if you drag that, you can put it anywhere you'd like. So if I want to reference it off of this corner, I can move it there. If I want to do that again, that's up in the upper left corner, grab the crosshair, and I can center it on this point on the square that I have. Do that again. I don't think it took. There it is, and now you see that 0 is directly above this edge and directly to the left of this edge. So you can move your rulers around if you need to reference other places in your document, in your artwork. I can move it over to over here along the center point of the artboard, anywhere you'd like. So let's clear up some confusion with the artboard rulers and the global rulers. The first thing is there's a difference. What is that difference? So I just dragged the origin, which is the 0, 0 point, from over there to this place that was midway vertical on this artboard over here. And so we can see 0 is this line, and 0 is this line going across the middle. Does that make sense? I hope so. Now this is in relation to this artboard only. The other artboards are going to have their artboard ruler at wherever it was set previously. For this middle one, we haven't changed it at all. If I click, and you can, if you can on your screen, I can see it on mine. You probably won't be able to see it on this video. If I click on this other screen, you can see that the 0 moved. My origin for this point is 0 here and 0 here. And again, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a subtle change. If I have the selection tool active, I can click on an artboard, and there's a subtle change on the border of that artboard. That's how I know I'm on this artboard rather than another one. So I've now got this artboard and this artboard and this one. And remember, with this one, we had moved where the 0 point was. We had it all the way over here. And so I can move that again on this artboard to the original corner. And now all of these artboards, when I click on them, 0 is going to be at this upper right or upper left corner. There it is, and there it is. Now those are artboard rulers, and you can change back and forth between artboard rulers and global rulers. Global rulers are going to have a similar measurement from an origin, and that origin is the 0, 0 point on the first artboard that was created. So I will go up here, I will right click on my ruler, change to global rulers, and you can see that it's over here because I had that active at one point. I can move it back to here, and now it's over at that first artboard. So there on your screen. Sorry, I forgot it's kind of backwards. Anyway, I can change it back to artboard rulers, and now 0 is affected by whichever artboard I'm on. Again, I can move that artboard ruler to a different place, and it's not affecting the other artboards. This artboard is still up here, this artboard is still up here, the origin is still up here rather, and on this one the origin is now at the upper left corner of this square rather than the upper left corner of the artboard, and that's easy to fix. Back to 0 there. I hope that makes sense. Rulers are great to use because you can manipulate and change and measure from different points, and then also if you have multiple artboards, again, you can measure from a starting point globally or from the artboard itself. So since I want to talk about guides, I'm going to get rid of these other extra artboards. Shift O, click on it, delete, click, delete, and escape to get back to the first artboard. I'll do Command 0 or Control 0 to go fit the artboard in the window. And then I'm going to grab the ellipse tool, L for ellipse, and make a few circles. And I will turn that to a black just so I have some contrast, and I will copy and have a second one over here just so I can show you a little bit about guides, and here we're going to start doing that. So the first thing is, by default you have what are called smart guides, and smart guides will help you align things, and they will be shown in a green color. And if you don't see them, they are right here on the View menu down to Command U or Control U on a PC. So Command U, Control U, and that'll turn on your smart guides. And watch what happens when I start moving around an object. You can see that these green guides will help me to align things. You'll see that things are going to stay straight or not. I can intersect based on a point of another object. I can intersect with the center, and you see that center line. I can move them around, and you'll see all sorts of these green lines coming from points and references around your artwork. And basically those are the smart guides. Now if I Command U to turn those off and then start moving around, you don't see those anymore. So they're a toggle just like any of these other toggle settings. Command U, Control U on, and Command U, Control U off. So I'm going to leave them on because they're kind of helpful. And the other thing I'm going to do is make sure that I'm snapping. And I don't mean with my fingers, I mean snap to a point or snap to grid. And in this case I want to snap to points because, for example, let's turn snap to point off, and that is Alt or Option and Command and the single quote or the quote, or you can do Option Control Quote, and that will turn them on and off. I'll turn them off now, and I can put this anywhere and it won't snap to points. I mean, I can use the guides, the smart guides. Let's turn off the smart guides, and I'd have no idea where the corner of the box is, that square. I have no idea where it is because it's behind the circle. Let's do Command U to turn the smart guides back on, and Command Option Quote to turn on the snap. I usually just leave it on, that's why I'm having trouble with the shortcut. But anyway, you see I can snap to a point, I can snap to the lines, and there you go. It helps me to align things, and that's the smart guides and snapping. So to add a guide, and other than the smart guides, there are other guides that are permanent. They will stay on the screen in your artwork, and even in objects. You can put guides within objects to use to move them around and align them with other things as well. In order to add a new guide, you go to either the top or the left ruler bar, and you can just drag a line and put it anywhere you'd like on the screen. I have mine as dots and pink or magenta color by default, and because that's a different color than the blue when you select or the green when you're using a smart guide, You can change your guides, and I'll show you how to do that. You'll go to your preferences. So again, what is the preference shortcut? It's Command K or Control K. And so then we'll go down to Guides and Grid, and then you can change that color, do a nice deep red if you prefer. There's a good red. And dots or lines are your options. I actually prefer lines. I left it as dots last time when I was showing someone something, and it transferred over when I upgraded to 2015. So I'm going to leave that there. And now you see it's this dark red line, solid line where my guides are. You can snap to the guide. As you saw, that anchor point on the side of the circle, it kind of snapped to it, and that's also because of the snapping to point feature that is enabled. So those are the guides. Again, you can drag multiple guides from either of the rulers. So here I have a couple from the top ruler and a couple vertical ones from the side, the left side ruler, and there are a couple of other things you can do. Let's go under the View and Guides, and you can hide the guides, and that shortcut is Command semicolon or Control semicolon, and that's a toggle again, on, off, on, off, on, off. Oops, let's bring them back on. You can lock them, and I have right now lock guides as selected. I will unselect that or deselect that, and the shortcut for that is Option or Alt and Control and semicolon. So let's show you what happens when I do that. I'm going to turn it back on. They're locked. Back off. They're unlocked. And so I can click on a guide, move it. Pardon me. Or I can just hit delete and delete it. I can select multiple guides if I wish, and hit Shift to unselect, and there we go. So those are the guides. Any questions on guides, add them in the comments or send me an email, get a hold of me, and I can help you with that. Now the grids are the last issue that we're going to discuss in this video. The grid is very similar to your guides, except instead of single guides being wherever you place them, a grid is start to, from the origin all the way to every corner of your artboard, and it's going to be measured and have a set number of spaces between the lines and segments or subdivisions within that, and I'll show you that right now. So first, to turn on the grid, you're going to use Command and the quote key. So Command or Control and quote, and as you can see, here they are. There are some options that you can do. Obviously, before we get into the options, let me show you a little bit about what grids do, and for that I'm going to zoom in quite a bit here. Well, so I'm going to select the P tool, the pen tool, by using P and on the keyboard, and I can click one of the intersections of the grid, and I start drawing a line, and you can see where my line is. It's out there, and it kind of goes wherever I move my cursor, my mouse or my stylus, whatever I'm using. However, let's delete that and go to View and go down to Snap to Grid, which is Shift Command semicolon, or Shift Command quote. And that means I'm snapping. Just remember when we snapped to our guides, now we're snapping, or snapped to a point, now we're snapping to the grid itself. So if I try to click anywhere that is not part of an intersection or one of these intersections of the subdivisions, watch what happens. It goes to the nearest of what it thinks is the nearest point of those intersections. And as I draw, I can try and draw a line, and it'll go and snap that next point to the nearest intersection. Does that make sense? Maybe you can't see them as well. So what we'll do is we will escape from that. I'll actually delete those points, and we'll go into preferences, and we'll make our grids a little more obvious. So Command K, I should have asked. Control K for your preferences, and then down to grid, or guides and grid. And for that we can change the color. And so I'm going to go with a custom color. Let's do another deep red like I had on my guides. And instead of the lines, I want to use dots. And instead of, I still want every inch, so I know where the inch marks are. And instead of 8 subdivisions, let's do 10. And now the other things we can do, as you see here in the corner, I'll hide my picture of myself. As you see here in the corner, there is our artwork in front of the grid, and that is because grids in back is checked, and so I can uncheck that. And when I click OK, now the grid is going to come to the front. And what in the world did I do to myself? Well, you can't see the subdivisions because of the settings that I used, and you can barely see the grid. You can see I still snap to it, but be very careful what you do with your grid line settings. So let me escape, and I'll go back and undo, which again is Command Z or Control Z, and it's not changing my grid. Whatever do I do? Shortcut key for your preferences, again, Command K. Go back into grid, guides and grid, and I'm going to go back to the default. Maybe I'll go with black. Black is an easy one. And stay with lines. I've had nothing but trouble when I go to the dots. And there it is. You can see in front of my artwork is my grid pattern. So I can snap on each point that I want to reference and make my new artwork. And that's the grids. You can change the grids, and one thing to note, the grids move with your document, and the next document that you open is going to use the previously saved preferences. That's pretty much with anything you use in the preferences. Also, let's say I move my ruler, my grid doesn't move. However, I can move my artboard, zero, zero, and my grid doesn't move, but it does move my artboard in relation to the grid. So that's important to know. The grid is going to stay wherever you left it, or actually wherever it's supposed to be, and you can move your artboard, you can move your artwork around to align to your grid, and I hope that helps. So the next thing you can watch if you are going in sequence is the 1.4 module, which is a tour around the Illustrator CC interface. And again, that's using the 2014. I recorded it yesterday. 2015 came out after it was released after I had posted it, so, or after I had recorded it. So that's my my disclaimer on that. So enjoy these videos, and I will look forward to seeing my students in class, and everybody else just follow along and see what you can learn about Adobe Illustrator. Thank you.